What's up, guys? Earth first, space later here. I wanted to bring you a short video today on some information that I came across yesterday from the CDC website. Right here, Vital Statistics Reporting Guidance. Guidelines for certifying deaths due to COVID-19. This is report number 3, April 2020. So this came out just a few days ago. I believe what we're going to see is a skyrocket in the number of deaths in the next week or two, and I wanted to show you guys why I think that's going to happen. So I'm just going to read some highlighted things from this report. But what this is doing is it's going to describe how they're going to go about filling out the death certificates in the next couple of weeks due to this virus. So here we go. In some cases, survival from COVID-19 can be complicated by pre-existing chronic conditions, especially those that result in diminished lung capacity, such as COPD or asthma. These medical conditions do not cause COVID-19, but can increase the risk of contracting a respiratory infection and death. So these conditions should be reported in Part 2 and not Part 1 of the death certificate. And I will explain what that is in a minute. Moving on, in cases where a definite diagnosis of COVID-19 cannot be made, but is suspected or likely, e.g., the circumstances are compelling within a reasonable degree of certainty, assuming, it's an assumption, it is acceptable to report COVID-19 on a death certificate as probable or presumed. In these instances, certifiers should use their best clinical judgment in determining if a COVID-19 infection was likely. So, just use your judgment. Again, there's no test. You can just use your judgment based on symptoms. All the symptoms that we see that could be attributed to something else. Additionally, the reported underlying cause of death should be specific enough to be useful for public health and research purposes. For example, a quote viral infection can be an underlying cause of death, but it is not specific. A more specific underlying cause of death in this instance would be COVID-19. So they want to make sure the people that are filling out the death certificates do not put a general term like viral infection, because then it could be the flu or something else. They want to make sure that those words COVID-19 are on the death certificate. Keeping on going here. An accurate count of the number of deaths due to COVID-19 infection, which depends in part on proper death certification, is critical to ongoing public health surveillance and response. Again, they're trying to ram home that it's very important that we have the COVID-19 on the death certificate. But here's where it starts to get fishy, if not already, when you can diagnose it just by suspecting it. Ideally, testing for COVID-19 should be conducted, but it is acceptable to report COVID-19 on a death certificate without this confirmation if the circumstances are compelling with a reasonable degree of certainty. So, they don't have to test for it, and all they have to do is presume based on symptoms, and they are allowed to put COVID-19 as a cause of death on the death certificate. You see how this could have the possibility of these numbers just running wild? I'm going to repeat that one more time. Ideally, testing for COVID-19 should be conducted, but it is acceptable to report COVID-19 on the death certificate without this confirmation if the circumstances are compelling within a reasonable degree of certainty. That's suspicious, don't you think? Alright, so back to the first statement I made about stuff like COPD being put in part 1 versus part 2. Here's the death certificate, guys. Part 1 is up here. This is where it's saying what the actual acute cause of death was and underlying causes of death. So, for instance, this says acute respiratory distress syndrome. I think this is what we're going to see a lot of, called ARDS. And then underneath that, it says that was due to pneumonia, which pneumonia was due to COVID-19. So the COVID-19 being an underlying cause of death. Part 2 is right here. Okay. So here's another example. Part 1, COVID-19 leading to acute respiratory acidosis. In part 2, they've got listed COPD. So what I find interesting is they're not going to allow you to use COPD as an underlying cause of death. Even though if you didn't have COPD and you got COVID-19, most likely you would probably survive and be okay. So I just thought that was interesting, kind of like lining up 10 people, having them hold their wrist out and going down with a blade and giving them a little slice on the wrist, and 9 out of 10 of them, they're fine. They stop bleeding after a while, but what we didn't know was one of them was on blood thinner and he died. And so using the same logic as this, not being able to use like COPD or anything like that as an underlying cause of the death, it would be like saying that blood thinner was not an underlying cause of the person's death. It doesn't, to me it seems like they're trying to push the underlying health issues down and just really focus on getting COVID-19 in that part 1 of the death certificate as the reason. So we'll see what the numbers look like in the next few days. The next thing I was going to read to you guys, I don't know how many of you guys remember this, but I remembered it a couple days ago after I found this report. So I went and looked it up, and I'm using an article from the Ron Paul Institute from 2018. It is called "Lifting of U.S. Propaganda Ban Gives New Meaning to Old Song." So I don't know if you guys remember when Obama was president, he signed something called the NDAA, or the National Defense Authorization Act. In this act, it included things like allowing the government to wiretap American citizens without a warrant, and also indefinitely imprisoning American citizens without a warrant or a charge in the name of national security. So just unlimited spying, whatever. They can do all that and not be held accountable. One thing that Obama did in 2013 when he renewed that piece of legislation from 2012, he put something in there called the Smith-Mundt, I guess it was the guy's name, Smith being one guy, Mundt, M-U-N-D-T, Modernization Act of 2012. What this did is it completely lifted the long existing ban on the domestic dissemination of U.S. government-produced propaganda. So, in layman's terms, it used to be illegal for the government to use the media for agenda-driven purposes to lie to the American citizens. That would be, normally, you would think that would be completely illegal. Obama lifted that ban with this legislation. For decades, the U.S. government had been allowed to produce and disseminate propaganda abroad in order to drum up support for its foreign wars, but it had been banned from distributing it domestically after the passage of the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948. So, when Obama modernized this act, he lifted that ban. So, we used to be able to use lies to support all of our phony foreign wars, but they didn't allow us to. It's basically, the CIA is supposed to only operate, abroad and not domestically. We know they do anyway, but same kind of stuff. So, moving on. 5 years later, the effects of the lifting of the ban have turned what was once a covert manipulation of the media by the government into a transparent revolving door between the media and the government. Get that? In the age of legal weaponized propaganda directed at the American people, false narratives have become so commonplace in the mainstream and even alternative media that these falsehoods have essentially become normalized, leading to an era of fake news and alternative facts. Those who create such news, regardless of the damage it causes or the demonstrably false nature of its claims, face little to no accountability as long as those lies are of service to U.S. interests. Meanwhile, media outlets that provide dissenting perspectives are being silenced at an alarming rate. How you like that? So, all right. So, propaganda is not intended. So that here's what they've done, guys. They've just made it legal for the government to work with the media to lie to us, and they don't get in trouble. And a big part of it is because the government is putting in their own people to parrot what they want them to say and disseminate information to us in order to further agendas. So this says propaganda is not intended to be factual or impartial. It is intended to serve a specific purpose, namely influencing public opinion in a way that serves the U.S. government interests. As Karl Rove, the former advisor and deputy chief of staff to George W. Bush, once said, quote, "The U.S. is an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality. This reality is not defined by facts, but by service to the empire." So the revolving door, guys. In recent years, there has been the growing trend of here's what I was talking about just a second ago. In recent years, there has been the growing trend of hiring former government officials, including former U.S. intelligence directors and other PSYOPs veterans, in positions once reserved for journalists. In their new capacity as talking heads on mainstream media reports, they repeat the stance of the U.S. intelligence community to millions of Americans with their statements and views unchallenged. Like CIA Anderson Cooper, CNN hired James Clapper, former National Director of Intelligence. MSNBC hired Brennan, John Brennan. So they're hiring all of, they put these people in front of us that have been, they're known liars. And they put them in front of us, and people have no idea the deception that they're just feeding to us, and they're not liable for the lies. And so to finish up here, guys, at the end of this article, it says, indeed, Edward Bernays, the father of public relations, who also worked closely with the government in the creation and dissemination of propaganda, once wrote, while this was once an invisible phenomenon, it is quickly becoming more obvious. Now, Silicon Valley oligarchs with ties to the U.S. government have bought mainstream media and pseudo-alternative media outlets and former CIA directors. Former CIA directors are given prominent analysis positions on cable news programs. Wow. The goal is to manufacture support at home for U.S.'s numerous conflicts around the world, which are only likely to grow as the Pentagon takes aim at competing states like Russia and China in an increasingly desperate protection of American hegemony. Now, that statement right there was back from a few years ago. That's when they were talking about all the stuff going on in the Middle East and Libya and Syria, which we're not hearing anything about anymore. But basically, just ransacking all the countries that didn't want to bow down to all the central banks of the world. But what we've got going on is COVID-19, and the same thing applies. The same thing is going to apply to this. They could get up there and they can say whatever they want, and we have to believe it. They're separating us. They're making us all stay at home. The only reference that we're going to get is that square that's on our walls, just putting the information in, and that's what everybody's believing. They can't question it. They're not allowed. We're not allowed. So the only thing we get is a TV and a computer screen. And you better believe that they're doing everything they can to control the information that comes out of the TVs and the computer screens and our phones. So I just wanted to share that information with you guys. It's interesting. Let's watch the death rates over the next couple weeks and keep asking questions and keep trying to get as much information as we can. I know it's going to be hard because they're probably going to end up locking everything down. Just be prepared. I don't know about toilet paper. I can't find any toilet paper anywhere around here, but make sure you've got some food and water for a couple of weeks. Water is more important than toilet paper. We just don't know what's going to happen. We're literally we're watching this day by day unfold, and everybody has different opinions on what's happening, what's going to happen, and it could be anything from really bad to really good. So the main thing is, don't be scared. Be grateful for what we have. Be grateful for our families and our friends. Let's be human. Let's take care of each other. But you guys, I appreciate your support, and thanks for listening. And I just wanted to, for the people that didn't know about the lifting of the ban of the propaganda, I just wanted to share that because that gives a lot of light to what we see on the news and how the news gets to behave the way they do without any kind of liability. So, all right, that's it. You guys have a great day. Peace.